Thanks. My name's Tim. I'm an addict. I don't think recovery is recovery unless there's curry afterwards, so I'm very glad we're doing that. My home group is Brick Lane Big Book Study, which we started on Brick Lane because there was curry afterwards. It's really important after a meeting to go for food, if you can. At least once a week to be eating with people. Sometimes a little bit of a hierarchy can develop in a meeting with the people who are sober or clean longer, the people who are newer, different groups of people. You're all eating together, getting the same curry down your bib, and it levels people. Do you know what I mean? It puts you on the same plane, and you see the humanity. People scrub up very well in meetings, and they share very well. And then you see them at dinner afterwards, and you see the real person. And that's both are real, but in different ways, I think. So food, I think, is very important. It also makes you realise you're not alone. There's nothing worse than leaving a meeting and going off into the dark night on your own, thinking it's another week before I see another human being. That's not good. Now, I know there's some new people here, and workshops are a lot. If you're in the first couple of months, for the first 5 minutes you'll be fine, and then the rest will. If there's a lot that you don't understand, that's fine. If you knew everything when you got here, you wouldn't need to be here. And workshops are often going to cover stuff for people who are new, stuff for people who are here a bit longer. My clean date is 24th of July 1993. To save you doing the maths, I was in my early 20s when I got clean, and I'm in my mid-50s now. I asked Lewis to round up some questions to find out what people wanted to talk about. And there may be other things people want to talk about. If there are, bring them up in the break, and then we'll squeeze everything in. But I'll give you a bit of an agenda of the questions that people said. So the main purpose of the book, Alcoholics Anonymous, is how to recover. And the question is, well, what does recovered look like? What does it mean to say you're recovered? And related to that, people who've done the steps but say they're still recovering, what does that mean? Does that have any meaning? And also, this was very interesting, how does a person become unrecovered? Is it possible, having recovered, to unrecover? That's not an idle question, that's a real question. Sponsoring pitfalls that's not really a question, it's more of a topic. The whole of sponsorship is pitfalls, but we'll come to that. And how does the power to carry the message actually work through those pitfalls? And then someone said, I wasn't quite sure what the tone of the question was, but it was something like, what's the point of the slogans? I got the sense that it was someone that didn't much like them and wanted to get the word from the horse's mouth as to whether we can ignore them or whether we should learn something from them. So I think it'd be helpful to cover this question of recovery. So the book says the main purpose of this book is to show people how we've recovered. Now, that was AA, that was alcohol. We're in CA. Whatever you did, whatever you took, wherever you stuck it, you're welcome. Snort it, sniff it, drink it, smear it on, just whatever did the trick. We're really not fussy. AA can be a bit fussy, but we're not fussy. We're recovering from that. But what is that addiction? You go to lots of meetings and people sometimes tell war stories. Generally, the men are more likely to tell the war stories about the places they went and the things they did, and the women are more likely to talk about how they felt. And that's just a natural division which seems to happen in meetings sometimes. And both are useful. But what really matters to me is, what is addiction in the first place? When I was 10 years sober, I'd not gone to many meetings for about a year and a half. I got really unhappy at around 8 years sober. Things are very different now. There's lots of big book, there's lots of program, there's lots of steps. 25 years ago, 23 years ago, not so much. I was in real trouble when I was 8 years in, and I went to meetings and people said, keep coming back. And they said, meeting makers make it. And I'm like, do you have nothing else? Do you have any actual substance? And there was just not very much. So I left, but I didn't do so well outside AA. I didn't drink. I think the thing that kept me going in that period was the fact I developed a relationship with a power greater than myself, who I talked to and asked to look after me. And I somehow got through those couple of years and got back. And the question which I asked myself, nothing wrong with asking questions in recovery, the question I asked myself was this: do I really need AA and Al-Anon and all of the other fellowships? Maybe I drank the way I drank, not because I'm alcoholic, but because I'm messed up. Because I went to lots of meetings around that time, and I'd been to thousands of meetings before that. I went to several meetings a day in my first year. And there's a huge amount of talk about people's childhoods and bad things that happened, and the terminology changes. In the early 90s, people talked about having had nervous breakdowns. Now it's trauma and post-traumatic stress, whatever. The terminology changes, but the facts remain. Awful lot of talk about that and the connection between that and addiction. And I thought, well, my childhood wasn't pretty. But it was over by that point, had been over a while. I was no longer in that household. I was no longer with those people. I was no longer in those awful situations which left me suicidal a lot of the time. I thought, that's dealt with. I was dealing in a civilised way with my family, with my parents. The past was, by and large, over. If I drank, well, how do I know that I drink alcoholically and wouldn't have just returned to being a normal drinker? If I drank the way I drank because I was messed up, now I'm not messed up, would I drink the way that I drank? Or would I be okay? As I said, there's nothing wrong with asking questions. When I'm asking a question, the question is already there. I'm admitting the question. But the question, so there's no good telling people stop asking questions, because once the question has arisen within them, it's stuck there until it's been answered. So you've got to answer it. If you don't know the answer, say, I don't know the answer, and you point them towards someone else, and eventually they'll find someone. So I had this question. Why when I drank so much, did I drink so much and do a bunch of other stuff as well? There are lots of behaviours I've had to recover from, substances, just a lot. And funnily enough, I came across some tapes of an AA speaker who's become a friend of mine, who talked a lot about the doctor's opinion. And there's a line in there which is a bit of a mouthful. I have to tell you what the line is, and then I'll tell you what it means in my language. It says, it didn't satisfy us to be told that we couldn't control our drinking just because we were maladjusted to life, were in full flight from reality, or were outright mental defectives. That's a long sentence. To break that down, the idea is this. People tell us the reason you drink so much is one of three reasons. Number one, you're unhappy. Number two, you're mad. Number two, you're thick. Pick one. And you listen to experts outside AA and addiction, and perhaps they're right, but they talk a lot about childhood, upbringing, all of the impressions, the things which affected us as having some role in producing the addiction. But these people are saying, yeah, we don't buy any of those. We don't buy the mad, the thick, or the unhappy explanation for it. Now, mad and thick are pretty easy to just blow out of the water. Because you in your drinking and using, you met people who were perfectly sane. They didn't think they were Napoleon. They didn't think they were an apple turnover. These are people that can hold down jobs and respond in a reasonable way to ordinary everyday situations. Their drinking and using might be crazy, but they weren't crazy. So that's not a good reason. Also, not everyone one encounters who is actually mad, who's psychotic, is also alcoholic. The two circles don't really overlap very much in my experience. So madness, no. You look around AA, people are just like people out there. There are some smart people, there are people that are not so smart. It's clearly not the case we're all sitting here with dunce caps on because we can't put 2 and 2 together and make 4. It's not because we didn't know what was happening. So it's not because I was mad, and it's not because I was thick. I did some pretty dumb stuff, and I was pretty divorced from reality by the end of my drinking, but at the beginning I wasn't. And yet, when I drank, I massively overshot my 18th birthday. I was too drunk to continue the evening by 7:45 in the evening. I just, talk about the inability to pace myself. That's a real failure of pacing when you're throwing up in a bush at 7:45. And you started drinking about 7:10. It was a good night, but it was a short night. So the question is, why did I do that? Now, there were times that I felt like drinking very badly or doing something because I was so wound up. But sometimes I felt like drinking because it was 5:00 in the afternoon, or because it was one of the 7 days of the week, or because I was having a nice day. There is no immediate connection between emotion and starting to drink. I had 6 months in AA before I had my last drink, and that was a really good experiment. My life got so much better just from going to meetings and finding some new people and learning about what my drinking was like, and from the mere fact of not drinking most of the time, everything was getting better. And I was really glad I'd found AA. I was happier then than I'd been in my whole life, and yet I kept going back to drink. I knew that there were answers to all of my problems in AA, and yet I kept going back to drink. So the idea that I go back because the pain is so bad doesn't wash with me, because I went back when the pain wasn't bad. And then you look in the big book, and on page 15, for you page junkies, page 15, there's a passage where Bill W., who is one of the co-founders of AA, said that he was having a really rough time in the first few months. So he had got sober by having a spiritual experience. He knew he had to try and help other people have this spiritual experience. He wasn't having much luck with others, but he was keeping himself sober. And he was so unhappy a lot of the time. But he didn't drink. He didn't relapse. And then one of the big stories about an alcoholic who relapses because he doesn't take up the program offered by AA is pages 39 to 43. Fred, whose life is ideal, his life is impeccable, he's had a great day, not a cloud on the horizon, and he drinks. So I can get rid of the idea that I drink again in response to I've had this emotion, I'm going to think through what to do, I know, I'll drink, and then I go and drink. That is not what is happening. Or happy people would never relapse, but they do. And unhappy people would always relapse, and they don't. Back to the childhood question. Do I drink the way I drink because of my childhood? Not an unreasonable hypothesis. I can see why people might say that. Everyone, God bless anyone in my family listening to this recording afterwards, but they're fucked. They really are, everyone in their own special way. There are some exceptions. That gets me out of it for Christmas. But there are so many unhappy people. Both my parents were, God rest their souls, were institutionalised for mental health problems. My sister had very serious mental health problems. My aunt, another sister, all sorts of cousins with all sorts of problems. Yet when they have a drink, nothing happens. Same trauma. So my mother and my aunt, growing up in Europe, I'm not as English as I might sound, growing up in Europe during the Second World War, some of the family in a concentration camp, beaten as children. You want trauma. That was a traumatic thing. Escaping along a road with Italian bombers, going very low and machine gunning the people in the refugee trains. That's trauma, near-death experience, and observing other people dying and being very seriously injured. When my mother had a drink, that was it. She'd had one drink. My aunt, exactly the same. So if it is causing trauma, why aren't they alcoholic? There's something else. Now, the fact is, the Big Book is brilliant because it says we don't actually care why you're an alcoholic. We care that you're an alcoholic. And our experience is this. If when you drink, you massively overshoot, if when you take whatever the substance is, you massively overshoot, bad news, Buster, you're stuck like it. It ain't going to go back to the way it was before. You're just in a different category of people. Now, I was like that from day one. I've got friends who didn't become alcoholic until they had been drinking socially for 20 years. And there's a click one day and it changes. And it's called this phenomenon of craving. Now, phenomenon means we're just observing it being there. That's what a phenomenon is. We're not interested in the why, we're interested in the that. So if you overshoot, what the book says is you don't even have to overshoot every time. If you overshoot 1 time out of 3, hard luck, join the club. It's going to get worse, by the way, over time. So this is one aspect of addiction, is when I have a drink or do something else, I get the flavour for it, even if I'm not enjoying it. You see, that's the other thing. The fourth thing to knock out of the park is the notion I did it because I liked it. Of course, when I liked it, I did it. But when I didn't like it, I did it. So I was never doing it because I liked it. Or when I stopped liking it, I'd have stopped doing it. And that was the real mystery in the last few months, when I was having a horrible time drinking and it didn't dent the quantity at all. And I felt condemned to doing it. And it's like being in a comedy club and you're having a great time, then you look round and you see by the exits there are men with machine guns and you're not allowed to leave and the show isn't funny anymore. So this physical aspect of it, the reason it says it's physical is because, well, to put it simply, once you're like that, you're stuck like it, you're built like it now. And I've spoken to a doctor who was the head of a treatment centre in Germany, a huge treatment centre and mental health hospital, a huge place. And he said what they say, the doctor's opinion essentially is the same as the science now. It's more refined now, but essentially once you're like this, you're stuck like it. You've got 2 options. Either carry on drinking until you're dead, or stay away from it entirely. Now, there's a second element, and it's really easy to test. Once you realise that you can't drink safely, if you drink again, welcome to AA, welcome to CA, welcome to whatever A is the appropriate one for you. This mental obsession business, the trouble is with the phrase mental obsession, is it makes it seem as though you have to be thinking about alcohol the whole time or thinking about drugs the whole time. And that's not what they meant. Doesn't mean you're preoccupied with it. Doesn't mean it's on your mind the whole time. In fact, I could be sober for weeks or months and the thought would occur to me to go and use, and poof, I'd be off again. Once I was living in a country, this is before I got properly sober, I was living in a foreign country. And I lived in a city, and the capital city had an English AA meeting, and I travelled on an overnight train 1,000 miles to this capital city, and I found the location of where this English-speaking meeting was supposed to be. This is before the internet, so if you got a piece of information and it was wrong, that's the end of you. There's nowhere to go and look anything up. I got there, no meeting. There was an old Russian woman saying, "The Americans left several weeks ago, we don't know where they went." And having gone through all that effing palaver, I went and had a drink. Now, there were things going through my mind, but the impulse to drink comes first and the alibi comes later. And so when I'm looking back at my drinking and using and asking why I did it, the last person you want to ask to find out why I did it was me, because I'm an unreliable witness. The whole nature of addiction is that it's about self-deception. So if you know someone is deceiving themselves, you don't ask them for information because they don't know how to give it. Now, right at the end, the game was up. I knew absolutely I was an addict, and my brother died of addiction, with addiction, pretty young. If he'd recovered, he wouldn't have died. The way he died, he wouldn't have died. I knew the game was up, and as soon as you realise you're under the cosh of something, as soon as you realise you're drinking and using against your will, the addiction's days are numbered, because pride naturally rebels against that. So if you were your addiction, how would you keep you drinking and using? You would convince you that you wanted to do it, that it was a good idea. And that's where all the self-deception comes in. It's the addiction's self-protection mechanism. If it had to say to you up front, yeah, I'm going to get you to do some stuff which I want you to do so I feel better, and it's going to kill you, are you okay with that? You'd be like, fuck no. Because it makes no sense. Why would I do that? For what? This little bit of my brain that wants another hit. The only way it gets me to do it is by convincing me that it's a good idea. And then, so I would say to myself, well, I drank because, or I drank in order to. And then years into AA and the other fellowships, I said, I would carry on the story. That was my addiction still talking to me, justifying why I did it. The cold, hard truth is this. My brain, as an addict, is programmed periodically to say, let's get loaded. And then to get me to do it, it tells me a lie, which I hear in my own voice and is very persuasive, to make it seem like a good idea. And then we all go off and get loaded. So it's compulsion coated with this alibi. That's addiction. So what's the solution? What does being recovered mean? Well, the first thing, my body is physically recovered, but that little bit of my brain which just wants to get high, which just wants to get out of it, which just wants to get loaded. It's like a little computer program. It's not like there's a person in there. You know, we talk about the addiction doing press-ups in the car park, but there isn't a person there. There's no thought. It's just a little mechanism in the brain. Bad news, that's always going to be there. The way a doctor once explained it to me is like a Formula One track which has been decommissioned, but it's got this black and yellow tape across the entrance to stop the cars going on it. But if that little thin piece of black and yellow tape is driven through, then the whole Formula One race will start up again. And I thought that was very helpful. And if you've had the misfortune to have anyone very close to you relapse, you'll see how nothing can stop it. And here's the weird thing. The longer people have been in, the harder it can be, not always, the harder it can be to come back after a slip or a relapse. I did know a woman who was 27 years sober, drank again for a couple of years, and when I last saw her, she was 27 years sober a second time. And she was amazing. Bristol. But it's rare. You know when you take your shoes to be repaired, and when you get them back, they look like your shoes, but they're just wrong? And a friend of mine drank again after 30 years. Acquaintance of mine drank again after 30 years. And when he came back wrong. Just the brain wasn't working in the same way, and we couldn't get through to him, and after a few months he disappeared again. Not unusual. But when you watch it, here's the amazing thing. Looking back, a friend of mine who relapsed a few years ago, when I look back, I could see the roots of it starting 3 or 4 years before the actual relapse happened. That was after 20 years in recovery. You can see the roots. If you spot things, you're not wrong in yourself or in someone else. Because you know what you're all the same on this, I think. That's how you know. If something's fishy, it's because it's fishy. You're not making it up. You might be wrong on the detail, but when there's something up, there's something up. So say something. My friend Louise said, you might as well tell the truth because they're going to die anyway. You might lose a friend. They might be pissed off with you for a while. But you don't want afterwards to have to say to yourself, if only I'd said something, maybe something could have been done. But once the juggernaut has started up and all of the mechanics are activated, nothing can stop it. Providence can stop it. Something can step in and just bring it to a halt. But there's no button you can press. There's no magic thing. Perhaps something you say will be part of that mechanism that stops them, but you can't make it happen. So what we're dealing with is really serious. And the upside, however, it's been said to me many times, you never have to use again. You never have to use again. And so this is not a cosmic lottery where lightning strikes some people drunk and other people are somehow preserved. It's entirely in my hands. And this is the amazing thing. You'd think if there's power greater than ourselves, God is going to come into our lives. Well, we just have to wait for it to happen. The amazing thing that it talks about in the book, it says in the foreword to the second edition, a wholesale miracle. So what is recovery? It is a miracle happening in my life. Now, if you were watching a game of billiards and you saw a ball moving across the bays of the billiard table, you could tell exactly where it was going to go, because whichever direction it's going in, that is the direction it's going to carry on going in unless it hits something. My life was going in one direction, which was down the pan in 1993. And then, with a kind of sharp knock to the head, as it were, suddenly my life started going in a different direction when one day I was going through the hall of the house I lived in, and I saw the telephone table, which I'd seen every day for the years I'd lived there, and I thought, why don't I call someone? I don't know who. And I looked and there's the call. It took 30 odd years to get through, but here it is. And I didn't know who I was going to call. And I opened the Yellow Pages or similar, and I looked up alcohol, my favourite topics. I looked up alcohol. There was Alcoholics Anonymous, and I called it. Now, the miracle happened when I suddenly decided to look up that number and make that call. And nothing's been the same since. Even though it's been terrible at times, the direction has been the right direction. Just because you're going through turbulence doesn't mean you're not still moving forward. So when you're in a plane and it's turbulent, it doesn't mean you're now going backwards. No, you're still going forwards, but it's bumpy. Just carry on. What's the point? The point is, if you were watching a billiards table and a ball was moving, and without anyone hitting it, it suddenly started going off in a new direction, you'd say, well, it's a miracle, because it appears to break the laws of science. A miracle is something which appears to break the laws of science. Science will tell you, when a ball is moving across a table, exactly where it's going to go, what will happen if it hits the stuff on the side or another ball. Science will tell you that. But science won't tell you if someone is going to pick up a billiard cue and hit one of the balls. Science can't predict that bit. And the thing with the miracle and God is you can't see God's hand, you can only see the effect. So that moment when my life started to go in a new direction, the miracle had already happened. That's what they mean when the miracle has already happened. The job of recovery is to take that miracle and turn it into a permanent state of affairs. And so what the book is about, basically, I can't get rid of the fact that I'm an addict. I can't get rid of the fact that my brain has this mechanism that will kill me. And over the past 30-odd years, there are little moments when it wakes up and says, let's get high. Let's have a drink. Let's do this. Let's do that. If recovery involves keeping that little fucker silent for the rest of my life, good luck with that one. Because your brain burps out bullshit all day long. And one of those little bullshit burps is going to involve a drink or something. You can't stop your brain from giving you really bad information. The only thing you can do is to stop that information tipping over and converting into action. Does that make sense? Like, the ability not to act on the most recent impulse that has come into your brain. Now, willpower won't cut it, because willpower is really good most of the time. It's really good just until the moment it stops being any good. And then you think, my God, I tried so hard for so long and it was all for nothing because I was going to fall anyway. And then the next time you're like, well, why bother going through the pain of resisting it when it's going to happen anyway? Then it's really got you. And so what happens today when the thought of a drink or a drug occurs to me is something happens within me which just makes it impossible. I remember when I was 17 years clean, I was in, to put it delicately, a situation. And in this situation, I thought, you know what? It would be so much easier if I just used, I frankly don't give a damn one way or the other. And I was close. And then a thought occurred to me. Now, I didn't make the thought occur to me. I didn't say, occur to me, thought. It just, do you know what I mean? It just happens to you. The next thought was, if you used, what would that do to all the people around you? And because I, by that point, did care about the people around me, that made a difference. And I thought, shit, I can't use. Damn. That's a bummer. And I didn't give it any more thought. Now, the exact form the defence comes in seems to vary from time to time. You might suddenly get a phone call. You might just have this visceral reaction where you're filled with horror at the idea of using. You might simply find yourself walking off in another direction thinking, this is weird because I was going to be using, but now I seem to be going to work. Well, let's just go to work then. But to cut a long story short, what happens is you discover yourself unable to use, even though you really want to. Most of the time you never think about it. But when you do, there's a bit in the book where it says that the compulsion to drink has never returned. Although when it does return, ... So, yeah, you're fine most of the time. It's not like you're having to rely on this miraculous response 57 times a day. After a while, it becomes occasional. Doesn't happen very often. But it's a reliable thing. Except the thing is, it's just like with being burgled. You can't take out insurance just for the moment the burglars are going to arrive and be uninsured the rest of the time, because you don't know when they're going to be there. So you've got to be insured the whole time. So the bad news with this recovery deal is, and to put it bluntly, there's no nice way of saying this, you have to have an operational relationship with a higher power, where you've got a higher power that's not just on Sundays and not just in theory and not just in principle, but it's a working relationship. The notion that you're a servant and God is the employer. Now, if you've got a problem with the notion of a higher power, you'll get used to it, as long as you don't put up too much of a fight, which wouldn't do you any favours. You can figure out the theology in about 5 years' time. Just park that. There are probably a few other things to clear up in your life, so maybe deal with those and worry about whether God created the universe and why there are dinosaur fossils and things like that. Figure that out. Like, make a note in your diary, 2031, did God create the universe? And just then park it. So this relationship with God, that's the core of being in a recovered condition, where you're not always cheerfully, but consistently submitted to a way of life which involves trying to do what you think God's will is, rather than doing whatever your brain happens to tell you. That's the recovered condition. Now, the trouble is with the word recovered, it gets used to mean all sorts of other things. Have you ever been in a CA business meeting or group conscience meeting, and it kicks off, and there's discussion going back and forth, and afterwards someone says, oh, Nigel, he didn't behave in a very recovered way, did he, today? And it's used as a synonym for nice. And recovered and nice, they overlap, but they're not the same thing. To be recovered means that I'm seeking to do God's will. It doesn't mean I'm not still fucked. And just because you're nice doesn't mean you're trying to do God's will. If you imagine what a spiritual sickness is, so people talk about being spiritually sick, and people think that it means you're kind of psychologically messed up and you're just incompetent at living and you're neurotic and you're emotional and you're childish and all of those things, and I don't think it's those. If you imagine a lake which is fed by a river with a spring upstream, and then there's an outlet at the bottom. Now imagine that lake, the inlet at the top is blocked up with a dam, and so there's no fresh water coming in. The water in the lake might still be fine for a good few months or even years, but eventually it's going to turn bad because there's no fresh water coming in. And that's spiritual sickness. It doesn't talk about the condition you're in. It talks about the relationship you have with God. Are you connected or are you disconnected? Are you open to receiving wisdom, direction, strength, encouragement from God? Or are you fine on your own? Those are the two basic conditions. On your own, good to go, Marlborough man, don't need any help. I'm fine. Or you're seeking a relationship with God. Either there is water coming into the lake or there is not. Now, imagine a lake which has been blocked for years and they unblock the dam at the top so fresh water is going to come in. it's going to take months or years before that lake is cleared out. So you can't tell whether someone is in fit spiritual condition by whether they're well turned out and scrubbed up and are behaving nice and civilised and all of those things. You can have people who are thoroughly selfish but are very good at operating in the world and have learned how to be cooperative and diplomatic and have all of those other skills, but they only care about themselves. And there are other people who are trying to form a relationship with God, but they have a backlog of about 20 years of stuff to deal with. You're going to need to give them a minute before the fact that they're having a spiritual experience actually shows in their behaviour. So recovered means that you're currently trying. It doesn't mean you look as though you're doing well. Now, the other questions. Oh yes, so the book's main purpose is to put you in a recovered position. Well, how does it do that? What's the deal? So some people, if they're very new, you'll know some of this, but perhaps other bits you won't know. How do you know you're self-reliant rather than God-reliant? It's because you do what you think is right. Someone says, why do you do that? And you tell them why. And you've got good reasons. Now, they might be good reasons, but they're reasons which have come from self. So being self-reliant doesn't mean that you make bad decisions or you're thick or you're crazy. It just means that you're the highest court in your own land. You're the final arbiter. You're the headmaster of your own school. I had a poor old sponsee, well, more than one for whom this was the case. I'd say to him something and he'd say, agreed. And I'm like, you just put that past your approvals committee, and the approvals committee said, oh, well, very good. So everything I'm giving you, you're auditing to see if it's up to scratch, to see if it meets your standards. Good luck with that. Self-reliance is having the last word. Self-reliance, I'll decide by myself. But what usually comes with that is opinions about... Does anyone in here have any opinions about that? Well, there we go. Has anyone been on social media recently? There are some people with some opinions there, aren't they? I was spouting off about something a few years ago with my other half, and he said, it's nice to have strong views, isn't it? I thought, fuck, I've blown it now. So what comes with being self-reliant is usually playing God in other people's lives, having a view. If only this were different, my life would be fine, my job would be fine, my company would be fine, my family would be fine, the country would be fine. If it wasn't for those pesky kids, then everything... It's like the baddie in Scooby-Doo. If it wasn't for those pesky kids, that is someone who is self-reliant, full of opinions, and that was me. So what does recovery do? Well, first of all, it helps me do a little worked example in the steps of, well, how's that been working out for you? Look at the results. Are you peaceful, happy, content, free of conflict, free of desire, just bumbling along, happy to just serve the world around you? No. Oh, okay. So when was your plan going to kick in? You're going to give it another few months, just see if it's going to work? Okay. So having realised that my plan doesn't work, I do a couple of things. I get off the throne, which doesn't belong to me anyway. Now, I've never really been on God's throne. It was only in my imagination. But whenever I'm listening to the news, whenever I'm listening to the radio, whenever I'm reading newspapers, whenever I'm in my home group criticising things, I think I'm on God's throne doing the judging. So I've got to realise, first of all, I'm not on God's throne. God is on God's throne. I need to drop my plans because they haven't been working and they get in the way. That's the third thing. The fourth thing is to issue a general amnesty to everyone for everything. Because the only person I'm keeping on the hook, I'm not holding them to account. I'm keeping myself in prison. The way to forgive people is not to continue to see people as miserable wretches, but to kind of dispense forgiveness like putting an ointment on it or something. It's to withdraw my judgment in the first place. And then we've got the biggies, which is I've got to confess all of the stuff that's been going on to someone in step 5, and I've got to make amends. And to do that, I need to do an inventory, which is steps 4 and 5. Now, you might say, well, why can't you? I'm going to do another few minutes, just 5 more minutes before the break. You might say, right, you need a higher power in order to get between you and the drink. Fine, because if you have the drink, you're going to die. We don't want that to happen. So great. Why don't we just go and have a relationship with a higher power? Why do we need any of that crap? Why do we need to do any of that program? Unfortunately, it's house rules. Because let's say you're working for an employer. You sign up, but you're trying to run your little business under the desk. You won't be running your business well anymore, and you won't be serving your employer anymore. So that business has to be shut down. And when someone explained that to me, it made sense. Why I have to recognise my real position, which is not creator but creature. I'm created. So my purpose was not given to me by me. The pot doesn't give itself its own purpose. It's the potter who gives the pot the purpose. The pot doesn't know anything from purpose. It's just sitting there. I had to recognise my real status in relation to the universe, in relation to God, and I had to wind up the business and pay all of the debts. Once that's done, I'm now free to do the new thing. And serving God, you know, you go to any street corner and there are people with the placards and encouraging. Fair enough. We're not talking about that. We're talking about something, frankly, far more frightening, which is accepting direction from God on a daily basis about how to live. Now, sometimes people pose very complicated questions to God, like, what shall I do with my life? And, you know, don't need to worry about that. God only wants me to ask him, what shall I do today? And if there are 100 things to do today, 99 of them are exactly the same as every other day. So there isn't a huge mystery. What is God's will? You already know. It's doing the right thing at work. It's doing the right thing at home. Maybe eat a little less. Maybe spend a little less. Just watch a few. Just shave off some of the corners from some of the behaviour. Keep your mouth shut occasionally. It's not a great mystery. So that's what recovery is. It's having a relationship with God where I say to God in the morning, what do you want me to do? And those things to do break down into 3 categories. Number 1, keep the show on the road. I've got to keep my affairs in order. Number 2, fulfill my obligations in recovery and outside recovery. Number 3, make something of the fact that I'm on the planet and still alive, because I might not be, and a lot of people are not. So let's make the most out of being alive and not just be passive recipients of content through devices. There's a lot more to do than that. But with the other questions about recovering versus recovered and how does a person become unrecovered, a friend of mine, someone asked him, he's been sober since 1976, and he's still alive. And someone said to him, so, they were trying to start an argument. They said, so, are you recovering or are you recovered? Then they kind of stood there with the arms crossed, waiting for the answer. And he said, yes. Which I think is brilliant. So basically, if you've adopted the new position, you've forgiven people, you've done the inventory, you've stopped harming people in your day-to-day life, you've confessed the wrongs and you've made the amends completely. Once you've completed that, I think you can say you're not in the clear, but you're in the safe zone. Now, even in that condition, there's a long way to go before you get everything sorted out. And you're going to really embarrass yourself. Once you complete amends, you think, I'm there now. You're going to be embarrassed for a good 10, 15 years on a daily basis with your own behaviour. So just be aware that that's going to happen. And so don't say recovered too loudly, because it will make the embarrassment worse. And then you realise certain things are probably never going to go. They quieten down, but it's like war wounds which kind of flare up when it's damp. It's like that with character defects. The performance is removed, but the potential is always there. So I think both are true. And I think in recovery, if you can hold two ideas in your mind at the same time, that's progress. And the idea, yes, you've recovered in a really substantial way, but there's stuff you're still working on. How do you become unrecovered? Very, very simple. You stop doing what it says on pages 84 to 88 of the big book. You stop sponsoring, you stop going to meetings, and all your friends just sit back with the popcorn waiting for it to happen. It's not complicated. It's not complicated. Just keep doing the things that you tell a newcomer to do. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. So in the second half, we're going to talk about sponsorship and the slogans. Thanks for listening.